The 1980s was a decade of divides. The proud industrial heartlands of the North suffering irreversible decline. The City of London enjoying an unprecedented boom. In the early 1980s, unemployment soared to the highest level since the Great Depression. Manufacturing fell off a cliff. But not everybody suffered in the 1980s. Financial liberalisation and tax cuts saw a boom in the finance sector. A country which was once the workshop of the world, now the epicentre of global finance. But it wasn't just the new skyscrapers that were transforming the capital city. There was a new ethos of rugged individualism. Greed is good. There is no such thing as society. The young, upwardly mobile professionals were living the dream. The first mobile phones, designer clothes and flashy cars, but most of all, loads of money. The yuppie became a pejorative term, the early foot soldiers of gentrification and elitism. It was a stark contrast to the vanishing realities of old working class respectability, honesty and thrift. In fact, the 1980s saw a seeming breakdown in the old British values. Football hooligans marred the terraces, English clubs banned from Europe, crime rates soared to an all-time peak. In 1981, a wave of riots broke out in the inner cities, disaffected black youth, suffering high rates of youth unemployment and harassment from the police, a breakdown that would take years to heal. The decade had started with a hangover from the 1970s, rampant inflation, declining productivity, and a nation seemingly forever on strike. This had to change, said the Iron Lady. And if there was one figure who defined the divisive 80s, it was Margaret Thatcher. This lady is not for turning. No, no, no. At least you knew where you stood. Ironically, she had come to power in 1979, quoting St. Francis of Assisi on the footstep of Downing Street, "Where there is discord, may we bring harmony." But Thatcher was no saint, more revolutionary. Inflation had to be tamed. Interest rates were increased, spending cut, the economy went into deep recession. 365 economists urged her to change her policy. But the lady was not for turning. It was all a far cry from the woolly consensual politics of the post-war period. Out was Keynes and full employment. In was Milton Friedman and free market orthodoxy. She divided opinion like no other. To some, a saviour from Britain's decline and capture by the unions. To others, a prophet of materialism, selfishness and a growing economic divide. Back in 1973, she had served as a minister when a Conservative government seemed to capitulate to striking miners. But 10 years later, and Thatcher was ready to take on the miners. She was ready to do whatever it took, and she wasn't going to lose. For a divisive decade, Arthur Scargill and Mrs. Thatcher were the perfect double act, both convinced that history was on their side, stubborn and unwilling to bend. The miners' strike gained widespread sympathy, working men fighting for their jobs, their community and a sense of belonging, ideals which were perhaps slipping away from the country. But even the miners themselves were not united. Arthur Scargill had pressed ahead without ever calling a ballot. In Nottinghamshire, miners remained sceptical of Scargill's authoritarianism, and they kept working. The struggle became intensely bitter, communities divided, the police versus workers, the state versus the NUM, mining communities themselves driven apart. The Battle of Orgreave caused irreparable damage to the image of a neutral police force, not helped by the later Hillsborough disaster and the long cover-up. Although the public was somewhat divided, very largely the print media was on the side of Thatcher. Rupert Murdoch had bought The Sun in 1969, but his influence doubled in 1981 when he also bought The Times. Murdoch fought his own battle with the unions. In 1986, he secretly moved everything to the high-tech Wapping plant, sidestepping the troublesome print unions. It was another nail in the coffin for union power in the UK. After the miners struggled back to work exhausted and impoverished in March 1985, the days of union political influence were effectively over. The Murdoch era brought a new style of media, a media that had no qualms about openly campaigning and pushing an agenda. It was the Sun what won it, gloated the Murdoch press in 1992, and it was not without considerable truth. But one of the striking features of the 80s was a massive decline in trust in the media. In 1983, 53% said the media was doing a good job. 30 years later, that had fallen to 27%. But the fall from grace was not as acute as in banking. Amazingly, 90% felt the banks did a good job in 1983. 30 years later, that would just be 19%. Back in the early 1980s, building societies lent mortgage based on existing savings. But that was too boring and too unprofitable for the brave new world of the 1980s. The Big Bang financial regulation overturned decades of regulation, and it replaced it with a profit-seeking culture where bankers were rewarded for taking risk, but when things went bust, it would be the taxpayer who would bail them out. As banks were deregulated, mortgage lending increased. It began the great UK house price boom, which would cause house prices to soar over the next 3 decades. Home ownership rates increased, largely because of a new right to buy. Council homes could be bought by existing tenants. Of course, it was highly popular with those who could buy at a discount, but like many aspects of the 1980s, it stored up problems for the future. There was no new building of new council housing to replace those sold. It would lead to a system of winners and losers in the housing market. If you had bought a house in 1981, today it would have increased by over 1,000%. But equally, if you're priced out and have to rent, the share of income going on rent has increased from 10% in 1980 to closer to 30% today. And it wasn't just council housing that was privatised in the 1980s. It was pretty much everything the government could get their hands on. British Airways, water, gas, electricity, telecoms. Selling off the family silver, bemoaned former Conservative PM Harold Macmillan in 1985. But for those buying shares that knocked down prices, privatisation was an easy way to make easy gains. There were some benefits of privatisation, especially those industries with competition. But handing over ownership of water to private companies would see decades of underinvestment as the new private firms took on debt and paid themselves generous dividends. And what of the North Sea oil bonanza, which did so much to help government finances at the start of the decade? Norway invested in a sovereign wealth fund now worth over $1 trillion. The UK offered tax cuts to the wealthy. And the tax cuts, privatisation, rising unemployment and financialisation of the economy all led to inevitable growth in inequality. To cap it all, Mrs. Thatcher had the bright idea of a poll tax. The unemployed should pay the same amount of tax as a millionaire. The 1980s dream in a nutshell. At the start of the 1980s, the UK and US were in the midst of a red-hot Cold War. In 1983, Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and Thatcher was a devoted follower of Reagan's rhetoric and ideology. Both saw the world in stark terms: capitalism versus communism, good versus evil. In 1981, the US sent nuclear cruise missiles to the UK, just at a time when fear of nuclear war was reaching fever pitch. In 1980, the UK government produced a booklet, Protect and Survive, about what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. It helpfully informed you that if you lived in a bungalow, you would have no protection against a nuclear bomb, but if you did have one, you could fill your cellar with bottled water and toilet paper. It might keep you alive for a few days. Needless to say, anxiety about a nuclear attack skyrocketed. But some women wanted a different approach. Over 30,000 women descended on Greenham Common to protest the arrival of American cruise missiles. CND enjoyed a surge of support and was even embraced by Michael Foot, the leader of the Labour Party. In an age of divisive politics, Labour swung to the left and in 1983 offered a radical manifesto: unilateral nuclear disarmament, massive renationalisation and redistribution of wealth. It was later referred to as the longest suicide note in history. At least you couldn't argue that politicians were all the same. In 1983, Labour slumped to 27% of the vote. Only the vagaries of the first-past-the-post system meant they hung on to a lot of parliamentary seats. The new Centre Party, the SDP, had briefly enjoyed a poor lead, but the 1980s were not a time for a moderate Centre Party, and they folded within a few years. But for all the talk of the 1980s as a decisive period in UK politics, the wider world saw an unexpected breakthrough. Almost miraculously, the Soviet Union elected a new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, who promised reform, democracy and freedom. Even the hard-bitten capitalists Reagan and Thatcher were smitten with a man who felt they could do business with. And Gorbachev didn't just make speeches, he followed it through. With a wave of change sweeping across Europe, people spontaneously demanded freedom and the end of the Iron Curtain. Any other Soviet leader would have sent in the tanks, but Gorbachev said yes to self-determination. The Berlin Wall fell, and the iconic division of East and West seemingly dissolved overnight. It was a moment of optimism, unification, a real sense history was changing. Back in Britain, there were other memorable events that united the nation. The 1981 wedding of Prince Charles and Diana was probably the high point of the royal family in Britain. 28 million people tuned in to watch the fairy tale wedding live on TV. It was an event that transcended class, politics, and the economic malaise of the country. The fact that this fairy tale wedding was more of a doomed threesome would not really emerge until the next decade. We could enjoy the spectacle for a while. Other memorable events of the 1980s included Band Aid in 1985, a grassroots response to the sight of starvation in Ethiopia and the global divide in wealth. Apart from the threat of nuclear war, the other great fear of the 1980s was AIDS. If you didn't live through the time, it's hard to understand the strength of feeling, or perhaps fear. In fact, the experience would lead to a softening in attitudes to homosexuality, and the irony of Thatcher's hold on British politics is that in many respects, Britain became more liberal, the old Victorian attitudes to sex falling away for good. But if I may end on a personal note, born in 1976, my most abiding memories of the 1980s was not economics, global events or culture, but the 1986 World Cup quarter-final against Argentina. The nation sat glued as Maradona dashed the hopes of a nation, first with blatant cheating and then with the most beautiful, mesmeric goal ever to grace a World Cup. At that age it was too much to lose, but at least I felt England would probably be winning a major trophy very soon. Well, if you enjoyed this video, you will definitely like this one about the 1970s, because much of the 1980s was a reaction to what happened in that previous decade. And beyond the myths, it is a fascinating story. Do share your experiences of the 1980s in the comments. Thanks for watching.